We continue now at the top of Daf Membeis Amud Beis Meseches Avodah Zara. This is Avodah Zarah Daf 42b. On the previous Amud there was a machlokes amoraim. If an Avodah Zara breaks on its own, are the pieces of that Avodah Zara, are they asur or are they mutter? And Rabbi Yochanan said that those pieces are asur, and Reish Lakish said that the pieces of the Avodah Zarah that breaks on its own, those pieces are mutter. And the Gemara asked a question on the previous summit from a Mishnah coming up. It was talking about the leaves falling off of an Asherah tree, where the Mishnah seemed to say that the leaves are asur, and so that's a support for Rabbi Yochanan, and a question against Reish Lakish. And the Gemara in the previous Amud answered that it's different over there because the main Avodah Zarah, which is the tree, is still standing, and therefore the leaves, they have an Isser as well. But the Gemara continues and questions that, V'hashipuyan, but what about the Braisa we had earlier about the shavings of an Avodah Zarah? Let's say a person is shaving down his Avodah Zarah. The Ikar Avodah Kochavim Kayemis, over there also, the main Avodah Zarah still remains. V'katani, and what did we say in the Braisa on the previous Amud? We said, Litzarcha, that if the person shaves the Avodah Zarah for its sake, meaning to say, to beautify the Avodah Zarah, so he asura, so the Avodah Zarah itself, that remains asur, v'shifuyah mutarn, but the shavings are going to be mutter. So again, why are those different than the leaves? And the Gemara continues and answers, Rav Huna bereid Rav Yoshua Amar. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua, says, Lefi she'ein avodas kochavim b'teila derech gedei lasa, because an Avodah Zarah is not going to be nullified if it's the way that it grows. Rashi explains, Derech Gedei Lasa Zed Darka Kol Hashana. This is its normal way the whole year, talking about the Asherah tree. Lahashir Olin Shalah, that the leaves come off, U'Lagadal Acher, and others grow. And that's why we're strict with the leaves. Aval Shafan Ovid Kochavim Daito Levatlan Ulahashlichan, but by the shavings, when an idolater shaves his Avodah Zarah, so he's thinking that the shavings are nullified, he's going to throw them away, and that's why they are not prohibited. And the Gemara continues, Eisvei Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish to Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish asks Rabbi Yochanan the following question. Again, Rabbi Yochanan is the one that says that we are strict. He says that if you have an Avodah Zarah that breaks, the broken pieces are prohibited. And the question over here is from a Mishnah in Me'ilah. The Mishnah in Me'ilah says, Kan shebarosha ilan, if you have a nest at the top of a tree shel hektish, and the tree is hektish, it was consecrated. So lo nanin, so lechatzchila, you're not allowed to get benefit from that nest. Right now we think we're talking about the wood, the pieces of branches of that nest. Velo mo'alin, however, if you do use it for personal use, it would not be considered to be me'ilah. Rashi explains, Lo nenin da'asr midrabanan. Lo nenin means on a drabanan level, you shouldn't get any benefit from it. Velo mo'alin, meaning im nen, if you do get benefit, lo mo'al midoraisa, that's not going to be considered me'ilah on a doraisa level. She is chayiv carbon me'ilah, that you should be chayiv to bring a carbon me'ilah. Again, that is not going to be me'ilah. That's when it comes to an ilan shel hektish. And the Mishnah continues, that's with regards to a tree of hektish, but barosha shel asherah, let's say the nest is at the top of an Asherah tree, a tree of an Avodah Zarah, so then Yat is Bekana, so then he can knock down the nest with a pole. Rashi explains, Yat is Bekana, Yashlich Atze Hakan B'makal, he takes a pole and he hits the Atze Hakan, he hits the wood of the nest, Ilan, he knocks it off the tree, V'yisrafim, and then he could burn that wood, V'yenemehem, he could get benefit from them. And the point over here is, V'lo Yala Al HaAsherah V'yitlim. Rashi says the reason why he's using a pole is because he shouldn't climb the Asherah tree to get them. Because if that's true, then he ends up that he's using the Asherah tree b'makom sulam, wherever the ladder is. That would be considered getting hana minhu Asherah from the Asherah tree. So that's why he uses a pole. But again, what is it saying in this Mishnah? It says Yat is bekana. It says that he is allowed to use the wood of the nest. And so the Gemara now continues. Right now we think that the bird, when it was making this nest, it took the wood from the tree itself, and it made the nest from the wood of this very same tree. And what does it say in the Mishnah? It says Yat is bekana. It says that you're allowed to knock that nest off the tree and you can use that wood. And so therefore, Reish Lakish says to Rabbi Yochanan, it seems that because this is Shivrei Avodah Zarah, this was broken by the bird. The tree was broken, and again, it turned this wood into a nest. Therefore, it's permitted. That's why it says Yat is bekana, and that's why Reish Lakish brings this Mishnah as a proof to his position. And the Gemara continues and answers, no, hacha b'mayaskin. On here, what is the case? Could go into Aisi eitzim me'alma v'kinsa behen. The bird brought wood from other trees and created the nest. The wood did not come from this particular Asherah tree, and that's why the wood is mutter. Therefore, there's no question on Rabbi Yochanan. And the Gemara says, Deikonami, we can bring a proof that this is true as well, meaning to say that the wood came from other trees. The Katani Gabe Hektish, because again, what did it say in this Mishnah by the tree of Hektish? It said, Lo nenin velo moalin. It said you can't get benefit lechatchila, but it's not me'ila on a doraisa level. Why is it not me'ila on a doraisa level? If you're going to say correctly that the wood came from other trees, so hainu to Katani Gabe Hektish lo nenin velo moalin. So that's why it would make sense that you're not supposed to get benefit on the Rabbanon level, but it's not really me'ila on a doraisa level. That would make sense. But so lo nenin midrabanan, again, you don't get benefit on a Rabbanon level, velo moalin midoraisa, but there's no me'ila on a doraisa level because it's not really from this tree. Rashi says, Lo nenin, again, you don't get hanan at the Rabbanon level, midrabanan dilma, asi lasanuye, me'atzei ho'ilan dehektish, meaning the Rabbanon said you shouldn't get benefit from the nest, because then, from the wood of the nest, because then maybe you'll actually end up getting benefit from the wood of the ilan of hektish gufa itself. Uva'asher lo gazru misham debedili mina, and then you'll have to say, according to this, that by the Asherah tree, there was no gezeira midrabanan, because people already separate themselves from an Asherah tree. So again, that would make sense if the wood of the nest is coming from somewhere else. Again, it's going to be a situation of lo ne'anin midrabanan and lo mo'alin midoraisa, the holo kadishi, because it really wasn't sanctified. You're talking about wood from the other tree. But if you're going to say that the nest here, the bird broke the wood from the tree itself and made the nest out of that, so amai lo mo'alin, so why shouldn't there be me'ila by the wood from this nest? Ha-kadishi, it certainly was sanctified, it was part of the tree. And so therefore, again, that's the Gemara is bringing the proof that this seems to be a correct answer. What Rabbi Yochanan is saying, that the wood actually is coming from other trees. But the Gemara says, Midi area, is that really the case? Are we really going to bring a proof? Rashi says here, Midi area, kolomar meholo to sayel Rabbi Yochanan. You can't bring a proof from the hektish part of the Mishnah to Rabbi Yochanan, because liolam b'shekinsa bi'atze hektish gufo, maybe the nest really came from the wood of the hektish tree itself, misham hachi lo moalin, and what's the reason why there's no me'ilan a doraisa level? That's what the Gemara now says. Midi area again, hacha b'gidulin haboin la'achar mikan. The reason why over here there's no me'ila is because here we're talking about growth that happened after you made the tree hektish. And mikan askinan, that's what we're dealing with over here. The kasavar, and this Mishnah holds, ein me'ila b'gidulin. There is no me'ila with the growth that happens after. And Rashi explains, the v'gidulin haboin b'ilan achar shehukta shaskinan. We're talking about the growth that happens after the tree was sanctified. V'hu lo hikdash elo ilan. He only consecrated the tree. The kasavar haitana, and the Tana of this mission holds, ein me'ila b'gidulin. There is no me'ila on a doraisa level by the growth. Umidarabonan hu dasiri. It's only asur on a darabonan level. V'gabi asherah nami, by the asherah you could say the same thing. B'shekinsa be'atzei asherah atzman. You're talking where the nest came from the atzei asherah itself. That could be the case. The katani yat is kiresh lakish, and then it would be saying that you can knock down the nest. Again, it would be a support for Reish Lakish. And the Gemara continues with another answer on behalf of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Avo, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Avo says that Rabbi Yochanan says, "My yat is." What does it mean you're going to knock? Yat is ba'afrochen. What it's talking about is you're not using the wood from the nest of the tree. What you're actually using is the afrochen, the young birds of the tree. So therefore, it has nothing to do with the wood of the tree at all. It could be Rabbi Yochanan is correct that when you have an Avodah Zara that breaks, it is prohibited. And here we're talking about the afrochim, the birds that are in the nest. And the Gemara continues, Amarle Rabbi Yaakov to Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Tachlifa. Rabbi Yaakov says to Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Tachlifa, Asabra Allah, I'll explain to you, Be'efrochin kan v'kan mutar, and I'm going to explain to you the halachas as follows. By the young birds here and here, it is mutar, and bebeitzim kan v'kan asurim, and when we're talking about the eggs, in both cases, it's going to be prohibited. We'll see Rashi in a moment. Amar Rav Ashi says, Ve'efrochin shetzrichin le'imon kebeitzim damu. If you have young birds, you have chicks that need their mother, they have the same status as eggs. And Rashi explains, Rabbi Avo, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Avo says that Rabbi Yochanan says, Mahadr l'turtze l'tuyuvte, b'shinui achrid is giving another answer on behalf of Rabbi Yochanan for the Mishnah. Liolam lo sukma b'shinuya dechika da'isi eitzam meyalma. Don't say this forced answer that the wood is coming from other trees. V'afilu hachi lo seilef minei heter shivrei avodas kochav. And still you can't learn from this Mishnah anything about the fact that the broken Avodah Zara is mutter. Tahad katani yat is bekana, because when it says you're going to knock it off with a pole, it's going on the chicks, it's going on the birds. Lo lo ha'etzim, it's not going on the wood. V'itzrich lashmeinon, and the Mishnah needs to teach us the lo gazrinan hatazas kone shem mayal l'derech ilan, because you'll say, of course, the birds are not going to be a problem. No, maybe you'll say there should be a gezerah decree that maybe you'll end up climbing the tree. We don't make that gezerah. We don't say a gezerah that if you use the pole, then maybe you're going to go and climb the tree. V'reisha be'etzim, and now according to this approach, so the beginning of the Mishnah actually is talking about the wood. V'kasavar ein me'ila begidulin, and the beginning of the Mishnah holds there is no me'ila when it comes to the growth. V'gali ha'hektish da'asar midrabanan, and so the Mishnah is telling you by hektish that there's an isra at a drabanan level. V'kol shekein li ashera, and it would certainly be true when it comes to the asher, when it comes to the Avodah Zara, the midoraisa nami asira. There we're even stricter when it comes to the growth. It's even asr on a doraisa level, the midoraisa nami asira tosefes yoser meikara. On a doraisa level, we say that the addition is even more asr than the main. Kedetanan masnisin gido pistol avodas kochav vehechlif notel mashehechlif ashar mutter. This is a Mishnah later on which discusses a tree which regrew, which again, there's a prohibition over there. V'hadalo arvinu, now the reason why we didn't combine the two, meaning to say, the reason why we didn't put together the halacha by hektish and the halacha by Avodah Zara, if in fact it is the same, mishum delo motzi lemisni le v'lo mo'alin ba'asher, that's just because you can't use the word me'ila by asher. In other words, if we're already saying this halacha by hektish about the nest, the prohibition that exists by the nest, why don't we also talk about the prohibition that exists by the asher tree? That's just because you can't use the language of Me'ila by Asherah. To halo shaykh abod din Me'ila, it's not shaykh, it's not relevant to have a din of Me'ila when it comes to Avodah Zara. V'seifa be'efrochen, and then the end of the Mishnah would be talking again about the young birds of the nest. V'gali ba'asherah, and again, it's telling you halacha by the Asherah tree. V'hu adin lahektish, and the same would be true by hektish. V'kasavar ein Me'ila begidulin, and again, according to this Mishnah, the Mishnah holds that there's no Me'ila on a doraisa level with the growth. And Rashi continues, the Gemara then said, Asab Ralach, I'll explain to you, Masnisin Alivad Rabbi Yochanan, I'll explain to you our Mishnah according to Rabbi Yochanan, Kan v'kan in both cases, meaning to say, Bein behektish, bein ba'asherah, whether we're talking about hektish or the asherah, whether the hektish tree or the asherah tree, mutarin, de'ein tzrichin le'ilan, the birds that are in the nest, they're mutter, the young birds, because they don't need the tree. But bebeitzim kan v'kan aser, but by the eggs, again, by both hektish and asherah, they're going to be aser, shetzrichin le'ilan, because they need the tree still. The gazer barabonan kali ilon atzmo, and so the rabbanan make a gezerah on those, just like on the tree itself. And again, then the Gemara concluded, according to Rav Ashi, that if the afrochen need their mother, they have the same status as eggs, because the idea is again they require the tree, and therefore we are strict. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Hamotzi Kalim, if one finds vessels, v'aleim tzuras chamot, tzuras levana, tzuras derakon, and upon them are engraved the image of the sun, the image of the moon, the image of a dragon, yolicham liyam hamelach, you have to take those vessels to the Dead Sea, meaning to say you cannot get benefit from those vessels. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says, Sha'al ha-mechubadin, if it's on respectable vessels, then asur, and then they're prohibited. But Sha'al ha-mevuzin, but if it's on disgraceful vessels, then mutarin, then they are permitted. And Rashi explains, Tzuras Chama, Mazal Chama, the constellation of the sun, it means, V'chein Levana, and that's what it means by the moon. And Rashi notes, V'Rabbanan, this Mishnah follows the Rabbanan, Diamri Kol Shar Tzlamim Mutar, and they say all other kinds of statues are mutter, and that's why we're specifically identifying these. U'v'Gemar Mefarish Ma'ishnahani, the Gemara will explain why these are different. Sha'al HaMechubadim, if it's on respectable vessels, Sha'al Kela Mechubadim, Shetashmishan L'chavad, again, it's on respectable vessels that are used for something that is honorable. Uva Gemara Mefarish La, and the Gemara will explain this. And the Gemara says, L'meimer, does this mean to say, De lahani hu de palchi lahu, that they bow, they worship these, meaning to say they worship the sun, the moon, and the drakon, but lamidi achrina lo, but they don't worship others. Uramini, but we have the following contradiction. The Mishnah in Meseches Chulin says, Hashochet l'shom yamim l'shom naharos, if somebody slaughters for the seas, for the rivers, l'shom midbar, for the wilderness, l'shom chama, for the sun, l'shom levana, for the moon, l'shom kochavim u'mazolos, for the stars and the constellations, l'shom Michael Sar Hagadol, for Michael, who's the great officer, the great angel, l'shom shilshal katan, for the small worm, it means to say the angel over the small worm, hare elu zivchei mesim, these are sacrifices to the dead, meaning to say these are considered sacrifices to Avodah Zara. Rashi explains, L'shem harim l'sar hamamuna al haharim. It means to say to the angel that's appointed over the mountains. That's the idea in general in this Mishnah. And shilshal, like we said, is tolas, is a worm. Alma or chayu lemiflechinu. You see that the way is to worship all of these things. Umistama nami nigzor dilma palchinu. So therefore we should make a gezerah when it comes again to finding, let's say, finding kalim with these images. We should make a gezerah on these as well. And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar Abaya, Abaya says, Miflach l'chol de meshachi polchi. They'll worship anything they find, but meitzer umafalchi. But when it comes to engraving images and worshiping, so hani tzalasa de chashivi tzayri lahu, these three which are important, again, chama, levon, and durakon, that they will engrave upolchi lahu and worship them, lamidi achrina. But if you find other things, vessels that have engravings of other objects, lenoi bi'alma avdi lahu, they're just doing that for mere decoration. And the Gemara continues, Mankit Rav Sheshes Chumri Masnais. Rav Sheshes compiled principles from the Mishnah and the Brisa as follows. Vitani, and he taught, Kol HaMazolos Mutar, and all constellations are mutar, Chutz Mi Mazal Chama Ulevana, except for the constellation of the sun and the moon. V'chol HaPartzufin Mutar, and all faces are mutar, Chutz Mi Partzof Adam, except for the face of man. V'chol HaTzuros Mutaros, and all engravings are mutar, Chutz Mi Tzuras Durakon, except for the image of the dragon. And Rashi explains first, Durakon dome lenachash. The Durakon is similar to a snake. Again, we translated it as dragon. Mankit chumre means malakit mishnayis hachamuros letarson ve'omron bebeis hamedrash. He collected these mishnayis in order to explain them in the Beis Medrash, kedei sheyitnu libon lepirkon, so that people should pay attention to their learning. Mutarim, they are permitted lekamon mefarish my mutar. And the Gemara, as it goes on, will explain what it means mutar and what it means permitted. And the Gemara continues, Amar Mar, the master said, we just said above, Kol hamaz Zalos mutar, and all of the constellations are permitted, chutz mi mazal chamu levana, except for the constellation of the sun and the moon. And so the Gemara says, Hachab ma'askin, and what exactly are we dealing with over here? Ilema ba'osa, if we're talking about making, you're making the images, again, of these constellations, and they're all mutar, it's mutar to make all of them, except for the sun and the moon. So iba'osa, if we're talking again about making it, kol ha'mazolos mishari, is it really true that all the other constellations are permitted to make? V'aksib, but it's written in the pasuk, lo sasun iti, and what do we learn from that pasuk of lo sasun iti, lo sasun kidemus shamoshai, hameshamshin lefanai b'morim? You can't make like the images of those servants that are attending to me in the heavens. And so the Gemara says, Elab Shita, rather it's obvious, but Motze, that what we're talking about over here, when we're saying Kol HaMazolos Mutar Chutz Mi Mazal Chamu Levana, we mean to say that you find a vessel with these engraved upon them. Uchedetanan, as we learned in our Mishnah, Hamotzi Kalim, if one finds vessels, V'aleim Tzuras Chama, Tzuras Levana, Tzuras Durakon, and upon them are the image of the sun, the image of the moon, the image of Durakon, Yolichem Liyam HaMelech, so he has to take them to the Yam HaMelech, and that's what it means over here, Kol HaMazolos Mutar Chutz Mi Mazal Chamu Levana. It means that when one finds vessels with Mazal Cham and Levana, that's going to be problematic. But the Gemara says, Iba Motze, but if that's true, if this collection of statements over here is talking about finding vessels, so Ema Mitziyasa, let's look at the middle statement. The middle statement said again that Kol HaPartzufin Mutar, and all faces are mutar except for parts of Adam. It says again Kol HaPartzufos Mutar and Chutz Mi parts of Adam. All of the faces are permitted except for the face of man. But Iba Motze, but if we're talking about finding vessels with these images, parts of Adam Miyasser, is the face of a man really forbidden? Vatanan, but again we learned in the Mishnah Hamotzi Kalim, if one finds vessels, the Mishnah again that we just quoted, V'aleim Tzuras Chama, Tzuras Levana, Tzuras Durakon, and upon the vessels are the image of the sun, the moon, or Durakon. Yolichem Liyam HaMelech, so then you take them to the Yam HaMelech. And again, it sounds like Tzuras Durakon in only the image of Durakon, but parts of Adam lo, but the face of a man would not be something that is prohibited. And so therefore, if we're going to say it's talking about Motzi, again, really we're just limited to the Chama, the Levana, the Durakon, but we shouldn't be forbidding the face of a person. So Elab Shita, so rather it's obvious you're going to have to say that in this particular line, when we're talking about it's all of the faces are mutar, except for the face of the man, Biyosa, that's when one is creating that image. Uchid Rav Huna Bereid Rav Yoshua, and that would follow what Rav Huna Bereid Rav Yoshua said, that's coming up later on. But again, the Gemara now says, Iba Osa, but if we're talking about making the image, So Ema Seifa. So again, now let's look at the very last line. It says Kol Hatzuros Mutaros. All of the images are permitted. Chutz Mitzuras Durakon, except for the image of Durakon. And so the Gemara says, 1 second, V'iba Osa Tzuras Durakon Miyasir. If we're talking about making the image, is the image of Durakon actually forbidden? V'aksib, but it's written in the pasuk Lo Sasun Iti Elohe Chesed Ve'Elohe Zav. It says, don't make gods of silver, gods of gold. And Rashi explains, first Rashi notes, V'dagim lo kari partsof, fish are not called a partsof, they're not called a face, elatzura, that's called an image. And so again, the Gemara said, Ilema ba'osef, if you say we're talking about making the images, V'hai mutarin dukamar mutar letzayirin, when it says it's permitted, it means it's permitted to engrave it. So the pasuk says, Iti bidmus ha'omdin etzli, it says in the pasuk, Lo sasun iti, the images that stand with me, and we learned out from Lo sasun iti that you can't make Lo sasun kidmus shamoshai hamishamshin lafanai b'morom, and meaning to say that you're not allowed to make any of these images, all of the mazolos, you're not allowed to make. And then the Gemara said, B'motzi, the Gemara said, okay, so maybe we're talking about finding these vessels with these images engraved upon them, umutar and b'hana kamar, and then the word mutar would mean that you're allowed to get benefit. And the Gemara said, you can't say that that's what it means, because if you're going to say that we're talking about b'motzi, so by parts of Adam, that actually would not be forbidden. Again, because the Mishnah said, if you find kalim with tzuras chama, tzuras levana, tzuras durakon, that's a problem, but parts of Adam would not be a problem. And so then the Gemara said, elap shita ba'osa, rather you're going to have to say that that line is talking about, that part of the statement is talking about when you actually make, by the partsufos, when you make the partsufos, it's mutter to make them, except for parts of Adam. And Rashi explains, the chol partsufin, when it says all faces could go into chaya uvehema, mutter letzayer, and it means all faces you're allowed to make, for example, of a wild animal, of domesticated animals, that's permitted. V'afagav, the shore of Yaryeh v'nesher, now even though the ox, the lion, the nesher, the eagle, shamoshin shal malohein, those are shamoshin in the sky. There's a bit of a question exactly what nesher refers to in various contexts, but in any case, those are part of the constellations. Lo damu, that's not similar. Dahasam arbosan yachad leguf echad. There you had all four of them with one body. V'hacha chad parts of a sulo. Here we're talking about one face and no more. So chutz mi parts of adam dafil lechudei asur. The point would be, again, if you're making these images, the only image alone that is problematic is the image of the man. And then the Gemara said, Uchud Rav Huna, B'rei Rav Yoshua, that it would follow. Again, we're talking here by the faces about making the images, and we're following Rav Huna, B'rei Rav Yoshua. T'yamar lekamon b'shmaitin, he says later on, Kari be'lo sasun osi kedemusi, you can't make that which is like my image, which again would refer to parts of Adam. So you're going to say that line about kol ha-partsufos, all of the faces are mutter, is talking about making those images, and the only one that's prohibited is the one that is kidmusi, the one that's like the image of God, referring to the parts of Adam, like Rav Huna B'rei Rav Yoshua. But again, the Gemara then went on to say, but then if we're talking about biosim, making the image, then you have a problem from the end of the statement, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Gimel Amud Aleph.